Okay. My name is Michael. I've been a fan of St. Pauli since 1987, I think was my first game here. And I was very lucky to work for the Stadium program, for the Stadium magazine, and I was also very lucky to write 2 books about the club. I studied history and I have a journalistic background, so I was very happy to write the anniversary book for the 100th anniversary in 2010. A lot of people ask me about the history of this club. One thing that I always want to get across as well is that it's not only about the history of a certain football club, but that St. Pauli can serve as an example, I think, for fans all over the world, as a positive example of what fans can actually achieve with a club, because everything, and simply everything that St. Pauli is today and everything that St. Pauli has today was made by the fans. The image of the club, the politics in the stadium, the skull and crossbones as a second logo, it all came from the fans. And it was never, a top-down decision made by the management, for example, and then adopted by the fans, but it was also always bottom-up. It came from the fan base and was at some point adopted by the club. And now the club is also, officially representing these values, but before that it was only the fans, and then at some point, the club listened to the fans and saw what it had and how valuable this fan base and the values were, and adopted them. And now, they're the official line of the political line of the club, so to say. But everything came out of the fan base, and I think that's a very uplifting thing to see. And you can learn from that, no matter which team you are a fan of, if you organize as fans, and if you work together towards certain things, to achieve certain things, you can achieve them. And it has, St. Pauli owes everything to its fans. So that's one important thing I always want to say about the club, because it's not only about the history of the club, but it's about a kind of an idea that you can get, and something that you can learn from this history that is important or might be valuable for all football fans around the world. I always say there are 2 St. Paulis. There's one St. Pauli before 1985 and one St. Pauli after 1985. Although, you can't precisely, name the year maybe, but in the mid-80s, the club changed. Before, it was a very regular, so to say, boring club. It was a very regular football club with very regular fans, playing mostly in the 2nd division. HSV was always the big team from Hamburg, and St. Pauli was always just, a small second division club. And that changed in the mid-80s of the last century. What happened is that a couple of things came together. The first important thing is that at that time, St. Pauli was playing in the 3rd division with very few people coming to the stadium, not like today. It was maybe 3,000, 4,000 people at the game. And there was no real fan base. So the absence of a fan base, that the fact that there was no fan base created the possibility to create a new fan base. So because St. Pauli played in the 3rd division and had few spectators, only created this chance to start something new there. And then what happened is that people who were punks and anarchists and lived in the famous Hafenstrasse building very close to the stadium, those were squats, like occupied buildings, the buildings were empty and people moved in and made them, kind of occupied them, made them their own. And these people from that punk and anarchist scene started coming to the games because if you were into football, but you were like a punk, HSV was not an option, because at that time, HSV had a problem with right-wing ideas in their stadium. Not anymore nowadays. The club is doing a lot against that. But back in the day, as a punker, you would not go to HSV. And even a lot of people from HSV changed their team and came to St. Pauli because here they felt safer. So these people started coming here, and what they found was, basically an empty stadium, something they could occupy as well, just as they occupied the buildings before, they kind of occupied the stadium and started showing themselves and started implementing ideas. The first thing was that one of those guys took a skull and crossbone flag and took it to the stadium. That happened in the mid-'80s for the first time. And then, this has a long history. Then later, the Fanladen adopted this logo, printed it on T-shirts, sold those T-shirts, and then later the club saw, oh, we can make money with that. So they bought the logo, and now the rest is history. You find the skull and crossbones all over the world and on everything that you can buy, basically. But it was a punker from the Hafenstrasse who took the flag to the stadium. And also at that time, it was very uncommon to be a member of a club, a football club. It was just not something you would do. And those people came here, and there were at some games still there were maybe racist chants, and so they decided, okay, we'll just become members of the club, so we have a voice in the club. And they did that. They became members of the club, and then changed a lot of things. And they had votes like when the members of the club meet, they make decisions. And since so many people from that scene, were members, they had a majority, so they voted for all these things. For example, St. Pauli became the first club in Germany in 1991 to have stadium rules that prohibited the chanting of racist chants, the showing of Nazi symbols, stuff like that, and all these things. So that was also in the mid-'80s, because people from that scene, from that punk and anarchist scene, came to the stadium. And a third very important thing happened, or actually two more important things. The first thing is that St. Pauli at the same time started to be successful. They played in the 3rd division. But then in 1986, they went up to 2nd division, and in 1988, they went to 1st division. So that drew more people to the stadium. And because there were already like-minded people, other like-minded people came. So the people that came and were attracted, also because the football was more successful, were also a lot of people, with left-wing ideas or, who were open to those ideas. And a very other important thing happened. Private media took over reporting on football in Germany about that year that St. Pauli went to the 1st division in 1988. About that time, before, national TV was always reporting about the games, and they would just show the games and results, and that was it. What private television did was they were looking for stories to tell around a club. They weren't just showing the games or just the results. They were looking for stories, for interesting stories. And St. Pauli was lucky enough to be there at that time, and St. Pauli was lucky enough to have all these stories that private television was looking for, And so private television also helped create the image of this club as an underdog, with the left-wing fans, with a kind of special scene on the terraces, and helped transport this image into millions of German living rooms. And that was something very important that happened around that time. So a lot of factors came together in the mid-'80s that laid the foundation for what St. Pauli is today. there were different reactions. There were people who welcomed that there was an active fan scene and that these people were fighting for something. But of course, I'm sure, and I know because I've interviewed some of these people, that they were kind of, wondering like, who are these guys? Like, what do they want? And that it needed communication between the parties to understand each other. But that is always something that was very, that was lived here, so to say. Communication was always a big factor in the club, and people have always managed to talk to each other. Not always to have the same position at the end of the day, but just to talk to each other, to understand each other. And that is what happened then as well. So, people talk to each other and try to understand each other's standpoints. And then I guess a lot of the old fans, so to say, or the elder fans, saw that, these people had no bad intentions. And I mean, most people here, whether you're a political person or not, I mean, nobody would really support Nazis, even if you're an unpolitical person, it's just like common sense. So, it was nothing that they could really have anything against. So it was pretty peaceful. There was no fights or anything between these groups. And nowadays, it's so common with this club, and it's so accepted that you don't even ask that question anymore. Like, anyone who becomes a fan here knows what this is about and what the core values are that the club stands for. What happens is still that the people that come to the stadium are very diverse. They don't all vote for the same political party, I'm sure. There's all kinds of different opinions, but there are some core values that almost everybody who comes here supports. The anti-fascism, anti-racism, anti-homophobia, anti-commercialization of football, or like an overly commercialization of football. These are core values that most of the people that come here can agree on, no matter their political background. I think the struggle that is going on within the club and also within a lot of fans, between commercialization on the one side, and you kind of need to go with the flow if you want to exist in modern football, but also you don't want to over commercialize, and the borders are not clearly defined. So I think this will just be a constant struggle that this club has to fight, and it will always be there can never be a real definition of what is too much or what is too little, but the fact that is give me a lot of hope that it will work is, again, the dialogue that's going on. If something goes wrong in the eyes of the fans, or if something is too much for them, they voice their opinion and make themselves heard, and then the managers of the club listen to that and sit down with the fans usually and exchange their opinions and see what they can do. And on many occasions, a reaction from fans to something that happened changed things. Things that sponsors did, for example, fans protested that, and then that was changed. And this will be a constant process that will go on for the next years and decades, hopefully, that there will be dialogue in the club, that the management will have an open ear to what the fans say, and that the fans also try to understand that the management, of course, their job is to make as much money as possible to be able to play successful football. Because if you play in 5th division, this whole thing wouldn't work as well, right? Or it wouldn't be as relevant. So it's a constant struggle that will go on. Well, one thing that has happened is that since the mid-'80s, when St. Pauli went to the 1st division, from that point on, the stadium was pretty much always sold out, always full. Back then it was a 20,000 capacity, nowadays it's a 30,000 capacity. But ever since then, the stadium was pretty much always sold out, no matter where the club played. So St. Pauli really became the first club in German football that was kind of able to detach itself from the results. The people would come to the stadium no matter where the club played, and that is something very special that this club has. And that it also took a while to understand the club, what was behind that, because in the 90s, the club was asking itself, why are all these people still coming here if we play in second division? And that was when the club started to think about what the fans brought to the stadium, the values that they brought, and the brand that they made St. Pauli. And only then the club started to kind of adopt that, adopt the skull and crossbones slowly, and now, adopt all these values and, officially promote them until today. But yeah, the results since the 80s never had a big influence on how many people would come to the stadium, because the stadium would always be full no matter what, pretty much, yeah. St. Pauli has this kind of punk image. I think there's even a shirt saying punk rock football. And of course you could argue how much punk rock it is, to play in the second division, get a lot of TV money. It's a business. We pay our players a lot of money. We pay our players a lot of money. We have to go with the flow. So what is punk rock about St. Pauli? That's what a lot of people ask me. And I think what it comes down to is this. The core idea of punk rock is the do-it-yourself approach and do-it-yourself idea, which was, back in the punk rock days, nobody plays music that we like, we're gonna play it ourselves. No one puts out our records, we'll start our own record labels. No one plays our music, sets up concerts, we'll organize our own concerts. This do-it-yourself idea is the core idea behind punk rock. And I think this idea reflects in St. Pauli very, very much. Because again, everything that this club has came out of the fan scene. It was do-it-yourself by the fans. And nowadays you have huge projects that were done by the fans. You have the Fanräume in the Gegengrade, which is a location, just like rooms for fans. That's where the Fanladen is. There's a space for fans to gather, to party, to discuss, to set up events. Or also the museum, the club museum that is in the making right now, was not started by the club. It was started by fans. The fans founded an organization to create a museum for the club. Of course, the club is supporting that, but it was started by fans. And this do-it-yourself idea is something that you find in every corner of the stadium, and very much. And I think that is what connects St. Pauli with punk rock, is this do-it-yourself idea. One thing about the skull and crossbones, that's also a thing that people ask me a lot, why is there a skull and crossbone? What does it stand for? And why is it so successful? I've talked about how fans, took the flag to the games. Then this symbol was adopted by the Fanladen. Fans printed it on T-shirts. Then later the club discovered, we can, make money with this and build an image as well. And that's what they did. And now it's all, it's all over the place. And it has become like the second official logo of the club. And why it's so successful? Because it's such a strong symbol. It's so much stronger than the official club logo. It's just a club crest. But the skull and crossbones stands for something. Everybody has an opinion about that, whether it's good or bad, but it polarizes, and that is what the success of the skull and crossbones is all about. It's like the picture of Che Guevara on a shirt. It stands for something. It polarizes. You have an opinion about that. People have an opinion about that, and that's exactly what the skull and crossbones is about. And I don't think it stands just for one thing, or for I think everyone maybe has their own interpretation of what the skull and crossbones stands for them. But everyone who wears that shirt, or most people who wear that shirt, want to express something with it, and that's why I think makes this skull and crossbones thing so successful. and is a reason why I think St. Pauli is up there in the top 5 German football teams in terms of merchandise sales. There's Bayern Munich is number 1, Dortmund is number 2, I think Schalke and maybe Mönchengladbach, but St. Pauli is number 5 or 4 in terms of merchandise sales, which is not explainable again with a success about playing football, because we're still just a second division team. But it's explainable if you look at what, especially the Skull and Crossbones, which is a big part of that merchandising, stands for, and that's what makes it so successful. That's true. Like, merchandise at one point of the history of the club actually saved the club, which was in 2003, when we went down to 3rd division and were almost bankrupt or almost had to file for bankruptcy. And then someone in the club came up with the idea of printing T-shirts with a German word reta, which is kind of savior, Salvador, I guess, in Spanish. So everyone who bought that shirt, which was, I don't know, 20 euros back then, I don't know, would donate basically all of the profit of that shirt would go to save the club from bankruptcy. And it started as a little idea, but our president at the time, Corny Littmann, was very good at promoting the idea and getting prominent people to support the whole thing. And it just became this giant thing that it was never intended to be, but it just became that. In the end, the club sold over 100,000 of these shirts alone, and just that saved the club from bankruptcy. There were other actions taken, but that alone would have saved the club. And it came to a point where the first T-shirts were brown T-shirts, the club color brown. So the first Reta shirts were printed in brown, and it became such a hype within a few weeks that at some point I was told by the merchandise manager at St. Pauli at that time that there was a point that nowhere in Europe could you buy brown T-shirts anymore to print this on. St. Pauli was trying to buy brown T-shirts to make more, but there weren't any available in Europe because this thing was getting so big. So they had to do black T-shirts, they did pink T-shirts for the gay parade, stuff like that. But that's how big that got. I think it would be hard to be that successful at this level without what happened in the 80s, because without that, St. Pauli might just be another SV Sandhausen, which also play in 2nd division, but there's nothing special about that club. And who knows how long they're going to stay in 2nd division. They're not a relevant club. They don't have a lot of fans. Still, they play in 2nd division, but they're not a global brand by any means. They're just a very local club with very few fans. And maybe the same would have happened to St. Pauli, because it's just a club de un barrio, right? And not the big team in Hamburg is still HSV and will always be HSV, in my opinion, as far as I'm concerned. So without all this and without the image that the club has, I think it would be hard to have the same success on the same level. Maybe you would play in the same division, 2nd division, but not have that relevance and be a worldwide brand, and have fan clubs in Argentina, which I'm sure SV Sandhausen does not have. St. Pauli in general is a very socially active club and has done a lot of things for the community, for this part of town, also for other social projects, that has to be said. There's a very big and famous project that also came out of this club, which was founded by an ex-player called Viva Con Agua, which I'm sure a lot of people know. Viva Con Agua funds drinking water projects mostly in Africa. The first project was in Cuba. Now it's mostly Africa, Asia. But at the same time, that is also something for their community, because that project has become so big that it gives people work. There's people employed by that, and there's a lot of volunteers who work for that and learn things. So people from the fan scene as well. So it pays back to the community here as well. But there's other, very many little projects that St. Pauli does. They support schools here, with equipment, by having, inviting them to the games or inviting them to the museum. Every year for Christmas, for example, St. Pauli invites homeless people or people who live on social welfare to the stadium and hands out free meals and hands out free gift bags with, you know, like merchandise that is useful for these people, like blankets and jackets and stuff like that. And very many little projects. And there's even a platform to kind of concentrate powers. It's called Kiezhelden. It's a platform founded by the club, which kind of, yeah, like I said, concentrates all the energy and concentrates all the projects and makes sure that no project is left out. And, you know, whatever money is collected through the club, for example, is divided, you know, equally and in a certain manner. So yeah, there's a lot of little things that the club does, but, you know, also very big projects like Viva Con Agua that have come out of this club. One of my favorite players would have to be Volker Ippig, who was a goalkeeper in the 80s. I have many favorite players, but Volker Ippig is also an important figure in the history of the club because he was not only a great goalkeeper, he really was, but he was also kind of an idol for the fans because of what he stood for, what kind of person he was, because he was a professional footballer. And then in, I think, 1983, he decided he had enough of professional football. It was all, you know, too big for him, too commercialized. And he went to Nicaragua as a social worker and helped build a hospital in Nicaragua. Came back from there, of course, with a lot of new impressions and with new political ideas, that were implemented in him. So he was very left-wing when he came back, maybe already before, but that time, and Nicaragua definitely had a big impact on him politically and about his ideas. And when he came back, he moved to the Hafenstraße, those occupied houses very close to the stadium, that were kind of the birthplace of the new fan scene that came to the games in the mid-'80s. So all these people that were coming to the games were his friends, and I remember when he came out of the players' tunnel, he would always greet them with a raised fist, like the workers' fist, like the workers' greeting. And yeah, he was great because he was basically the image of, he had all the aspects of the image of St. Pauli at that time. It was good football, left-wing ideas, and a very, just an interesting character, like an underdog character. And that, he was a good representation of St. Pauli. And, so for the fans, he was important to have a person to identify with, and that was Volker Eppig. And for me, I was, 14, 15 at that time. To me, he was just a hero. And I remember interviewing him for the book for 2010. And I remember that it was the only time that I was actually nervous before interviewing someone, just because I knew he was a special character, and because he had been such a big influence on me, as a person and as a football player. So I'd have to say Volker Eppig would be my favorite guy of the many guys that I love and that I've played here.
Großartige Grätsche, also der rettet hier das 0-0.
Wieder Kontersituation, St. Pauli jetzt über die rechte Seite, treibt Torrand den Ball, verfolgt von Elia. Und dann kommt er zur Grundlinie, bringt die Flanke aufs Tor von Rostow. Der muss die Fäuste am kurzen Eck hochreißen, um diese abgeglitschte Flanke nicht ins Tor fliegen zu lassen. Macht das mit einer guten Parade. Also da rutscht Torrand der Ball ein bisschen über den Spann. Der wäre im Eck gelandet und da faustet Frank Rost wie so ein Volleyballer am Netz. Blockt er den Ball mit beiden Fäusten über die Torlatte.
Eckball. Beste Chance für St. Pauli durch eine verunglückte Flanke.
In der 59. Spielminute und Ecke von der rechten Seite jetzt. Ecke von der rechten Seite. Kommt der Ball mit dem Flach reingespielt aufs kurze Fünfereck und ein Tor! Tor! Asamoah! Köpft das Ding ein! Ich gehe ein, Alter! Ich gehe so ein! Ich gehe ein! Der Ball dreht irgendwie verlängert am 5-Meter-Eck. Ich wollte sagen, der war zu kurz. Ich glaube, ein HSVer verlängert den Ball und Asamoah am langen Pfosten kann den Ball aus 28 Zentimetern einfach reindrücken ins Netz. Jo! Und da geht wieder Bengalo-Feuer an und die BFE-Einheit steht im Block. Meine Herren, ich werde bekloppt, Alter. Ich werde bescheuert. Kruse die Ecke von links, verlängert vom St. Paulianer und Asamoah vor. Alter Schwede, Asamoah köpft ihn einfach rein. Einfach reingelegt ins Nest.
Aber echt, jetzt sehen wir es hier nochmal auf dem Bildschirm. Es waren wirklich haargenau 28 Zentimeter, so wie du es gesehen hast. Großartig. 1-0, eine Stunde gespielt.
Wahnsinn, St. Pauli führt 1-0 in der
Arena ohne Namen. Nach dem Spielverlauf, wir sagen es einfach mal ganz leise, echt dermaßen unverdient, aber es ist egal. 1-0.
Ist völlig wurscht, St. Pauli.
I remember when I started going here, Dirk Zander, a very good forward who scored a lot of goals for us in first division as well. He scored a goal against Karlsruhe at that time with Oliver Kahn, who became, German national goalkeeper with Bayern Munich. He scored a goal after, I think, 11 seconds. And I was still entering the stadium, like walking along the fans. I didn't even see it happen, and everyone was already celebrating after 11 seconds. It was at that time was the fastest goal in German professional soccer. And I think he scored his second goal in the 4th minute, also against Oliver Kahn. And that was the fastest. Well, it's not a hat trick, it's 3 goals, but the fastest 2 goals in German history. So I remember that very well. I also remember very well the second goal by Nico Paczynski against Bayern Munich in 2001, when St. Pauli became the Weltpokal-Sieger-Besieger, which translates to the team that beat the World Cup winner at that time, Bayern Munich. The stadium was just going crazy. I remember my leather jacket being soaked with beer and everything. It was just people tumbling on me, and it was crazy. And two of my favorite goals are from the cup game against Hertha Berlin in 2005, and that famous cup run that took us to the semifinals against Bayern Munich. And that was the round of 16, I think, right before Christmas. And I remember Florian Lechner scored a goal where he had actually cramps in his legs, like he couldn't walk properly anymore. But he scored a goal from like 20 meters, and it went just in the corner. It was brilliant, and that was an equalizer. It was a 3-3 in overtime, and then the 4-3, the winning goal, was also awesome. It was scored by Robert Palikucha. It was a header, and I've never seen the stadium explode like that ever before or ever after. It was insane. I think it was 3 or 4 days before Christmas. I remember running around with a smile on my face the entire time. So those are definitely goals I remember. If I would think about it, I bet there would be a million more, but those are like 4 goals that instantly come to mind, yeah. I think if the club keeps doing what it does, and if the management keeps doing what it does, and if the fans keep doing what they do, the story of the club as we know it will continue. And I would more say something that I hope for, not something that I think will happen, because that's hard to say, but something that I would hope for is that St. Pauli keeps the ability to have dialogue within the club, because that has always brought advancement to the club. If people have talked about things, if people, raise their voices against something, or, just talk to each other to understand each other. So I hope that continues. I hope that people will keep raising their voice and keep standing for something and keep fighting for something. And if that happens, then I think the story will just hopefully continue the way it has the past years and decades. It's hard to copy this. It's not like if I was SV Sandhausen again, another team from German second division, it would be hard to just say, okay, we want to be like St. Pauli and do that. That's not possible. You cannot just adopt that. There were many, many factors who contributed to that. But if there's a message that I have, it's not so much to the clubs, but to the fans. What I've said before, that the fans should know that they have a lot of power. If they organize and if they stand up for something and if they make their voices heard, they can change a lot, just as it has happened at St. Pauli, in the mid-'80s, before this club was a very regular club, nothing special about it. As soon as the fans started acting here, that's what created all of this, everything that we see around us. And that's a message I have to the fans, to say, take this as a positive example. Of course, it has taken decades to come here. It was not an easy struggle either. It's a fight, and you have to stand up, and it might be a long fight to get where you want, but it can be done, and St. Pauli is an example of that.
St. Pauli, die Freiheit, das liegt uns so im Blut. Und hat das Lebensschiff ein Deck. In Hamburg bleiben wir am Deck. In Hamburg, da bleiben wir am Deck. Das Herz von St. Pauli, das bin ich zu Haus. Das Herz von St. Pauli, das ist meine Heimat in Hamburg, da bin ich zu Haus. Der